What's up, Pitt fans? This is Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. We both cover Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Welcome to another edition of the PG Pitt Show. Abby and I are here still kind of picking up the pieces from what happened in Morgantown on Saturday afternoon. Obviously, it came as a bit of a surprise to us. I think both of us underrated the Mountaineers quite a bit. And I guess we overrated the Panthers, Abby, because what we saw on Saturday was ugly. And until the Panthers correct it, it's going to be the only thing on everyone's mind, and they've got 2 weeks to sit with this loss because they're enjoying a bye week right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad when I drop off my car at the mechanic and the mechanic is like, dude, that must have sucked on Saturday, because he talks about sports with me, but not that much. So I was like, man, yeah. And then the bye week, it's got to suck having a loss and then going into the bye week, because like really you have nothing else to really think about. You're not going to go back and reflect on those wins that you had against Central Michigan and Duquesne. You're really just kind of sitting in the ugliness that was the Backyard Brawl.
Right, and I think that was one of the things that made us, I guess, more optimistic about this team, and was that, in theory, and obviously in theory because we were wrong, but like you, in theory, had 3 relatively easy games or games against teams that you thought you were better than going into the bye week, and then you kind of get a clean runway into ACC play. That's all out the window now, and now Louisville isn't about capitalizing on momentum and capitalizing on an opportunity. It's about picking up the pieces, like we said, and it's about kind of just coming back from a place that at the beginning of the year you really didn't imagine that you'd be in. So there's 2 ways to, I think, look at it, and we're kind of going to dive into a little bit of that in a moment. But like I think there are 2 ways to look at it. First being, okay, like we talked about on Saturday, Pitt beat itself, and that's I guess a more optimistic view of it. Now you've got 2 weeks to work on these things and self-scout and reset and everything. On the other hand, you beat yourself, right? Like these are controllable things, so why couldn't you control them for a game? So I guess there's some reasons for optimism, but there's also, you're kind of like, why am I digging for optimism in the first place after a game like that?
Yeah, losses are great in sports that have 30 plus games in a season, because then you get to really learn from them, and it's okay that you lost one game. In football, that's just not the case. Like if you really want to make a run at the playoffs, at the national championship, there's little room for error, and especially not against a team like West Virginia. And so it's a good time for bye week, because like you said, a lot of these things that they did badly on Saturday are fixable. It's just a matter of, can they actually fix them?
We're going to talk about that. Speaking, your question right there. We're going to try to, inject a little copium into the Pitt fan base this week, or at least at the start of this week, because Abby, our job today is to look for solutions. All right. Everything looks bleak right now. I don't think anyone is optimistic about what Pitt put on the fields in any phase of the game. On Saturday afternoon, there may be some pockets. Caleb Junko played well. The defensive line looked well, but looked good. But, we're going to start looking for solutions here. And we've split this up in a couple ways. First, we're going to talk about stuff that Pitt is able to take care of perhaps during the bye weeks. Over these 2 weeks going into that Louisville game on September 27th, what can Pitt do in those couple of weeks to address some of the stuff that went wrong? And there are 2 things, like we talked about before we started recording, that are pretty obvious. The first is the penalties. And I don't know if we need to relitigate that, but 14 for 114 yards or 118 maybe yards. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but 110 plus yards on 14 penalties. That's as much as Pitt's incurred in the past 5 years. And, some of them were to veteran guys. It's veteran guys screwing up in bad spots, and it's really just some silly mistakes. So I'd say that's the place you look first, is just don't be as undisciplined in 2 weeks when you have to get back on the field against Louisville. That feels pretty obvious to me.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you got guys like, we didn't see Desmond Reid after the 3rd drive. He was walking around on the sideline, had his helmet in his hand for a majority of it. But so that seems, just on my, non-professional view as in terms of injuries, that seems fixable. So get Desmond Reid healthy should be number one. I mean, another one within those injuries is Cruce Brookins. arguably the best defender out there as at least in the secondary on Saturday. And so getting him, but there's also, both cornerbacks were out. Zach Crothers kept hitting the ground, and that's a guy that has really been, adding a spark that is necessary. I'm sure I'm forgetting people. Kyle Lewis limped off the field the other day. There's a lot of banged up players right now that they need because too many of them are starters.
Yeah. So, health and the penalties, the health you have a little less control over, but the bye week does help you there. The penalties you have complete control over. And so, if Pitt has more than 2 or 3 penalties on, next Saturday against Louisville, I think it's fair to start, asking a few questions and, seeing trying to dig into what the root of this problem is, because it really cannot keep happening for Pitt. And like we said on Saturday, they completely beat themselves with the penalties. There's some stuff that's less easy to fix in 2 weeks, but still, I think, they're capable of doing it. And the first one, and I got to point out, and it's tough too, because this unit has been one of the best on the team over the past couple of years and through these first 2 weeks, especially, but all last year. I mean, the linebackers are, we think, a special group, and they were not special on Saturday afternoon. I mean, I kept seeing Rasheem Biles and Kyle Lewis get kind of washed out of run plays. They weren't able to set the edge and maintain the edge. When West Virginia ran to the outside, Ty Edwards had a day getting the ball out on the edge on the perimeter. But also, Lewis and Biles were, at least if you believe Pro Football Focus, they do some of these tracking numbers, not even by their grades, but just, when they were the primary guy in coverage, they got picked on a little bit. They gave up the most yards of any defender in the Pitt secondary, or Pitt guys who were in coverage. You just saw routinely they were getting beat, out to the edge on short throws. West Virginia was able to create yards after the catch. And they made some splash plays, obviously. And I'll throw Braylon Lovelace in there too. I don't think he played a great game either. There were some missed tackles all over. But, for Pitt to be better, their linebackers and their stars, particularly on defense, need to be a lot better. It was not a great day. Arguably, I think the worst that, at least since Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles have been starters, it's the worst that I've seen them play.
Yeah, you should never be worried about the linebackers. Never, period. Because Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles are back, first of all. And yes, Braylon Lovelace is a new starter, but he played a significant amount last week too. And yeah, like you said, they had their moments. Their interceptions were nice, but at the same time, they were thrown pretty much right to them.
Yeah.
And especially when you talk about Ty Edwards, that's a guy who wasn't even on their 2 deep. And so that's a guy that is below not only Jaheim White, but then their second and their third option. So that's your fourth, that's West Virginia's, for lack of a better term, fourth option. And he ran all over them. That should not be happening to an All-American like Kyle Lewis, to a veteran player like Rasheem Biles, and even Braylon Lovelace. And you can't, it's almost inexcusable, because with how good they have been against elite opponents, West Virginia may be better than we thought, but they are still not, top of the Big 12. So it should not have been that difficult to stop guys like Ty Edwards or any of their offensive pieces, because they were down their 2 top offensive pieces. And so I think it was just really frustrating to watch, because that's a group that, again, you should never be worried about playing well.
Absolutely. And, you're not off base at all. It is inexcusable for a group this talented to play as poorly as they did on Saturday. But by that, in that same vein, I'm not super worried about them. I think, like you said, we're putting this in the basket of stuff that's easy to fix over the next couple of weeks, because, well, you just need your superstars to play like superstars. And I believe, I've seen Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles play for more than a full year of starting snaps, and I think they're pretty good players, and I think they're going to figure it out next time.
Absolutely.
I think there's, switching to the other side of the ball, I think another thing that Pitt will be able to do, or could do, over these next couple of weeks is find ways to start faster on offense. That's a pretty broad term, but, looking specifically at how they started the West Virginia game, not a ton of, and even, I would go back to even the Central Michigan game and the Duquesne game more acutely, is there was not a ton of easy stuff for Eli Holstein right out of the gate. Easy throws, some design runs to get him out on his feet and get him really into the game. Let someone hit him, and I think that kind of wakes him up a little bit. But the blocking on the perimeter is not good enough to get some easy screens going. they're not calling Holstein's number a whole lot. I noticed against West Virginia, like they were spying Eli a lot. They didn't want to let him run. So, even when he was able to escape the pocket, there wasn't a ton of explosive stuff, or at least, runs for first down, because they were able to make tackles really quickly while they were keeping an eye on Eli. So I think there are a couple of different ways that you can get Eli into some more easy stuff, let him get his feet wet sooner. And I think that'll pay off further down the line because you noticed, I think, in that game, he got more comfortable as the game went on. It wasn't very comfortable at all for most of the game, but I think there are ways to get Holstein in particular and the rest of this offense as well, more integrated into their stuff, basically into the flow of the offense earlier in the game. And, if you can get them to, settle down a little bit earlier, it'll pay off, and you won't have to play from behind so often. It opens up your playbook a little bit more. I don't even think you need to be like the first team to score, but just you need some productive stuff early, and you didn't get that on Saturday.
I think the frustrating thing is that throughout training camp, throughout those first 2 games, the whole thing was, this is the second year on this offense. We're going to be cleaner. We're going to be faster. We're going to be smoother. And then when you couple that with, you brought back 2 of your top wide receivers, you brought back your number 1 running back, you brought back your quarterback. It should not be having this many miscues and taking so long to get started, because, like you said, the continuity is there. So it shouldn't be as difficult to get things going, and I mean, I think about how, Eli Holstein's been pretty good at passing for the most part, but there have been moments where maybe it needs to be more run focused, or who knows. I mean, they had 46 rushing yards on 34 attempts on Saturday. Like, that's not great at all. And yes, you factor in that Desmond Reid didn't play after the first quarter, but at the same time, that number's way too low for an offense that should be playing at a much higher caliber.
Yeah, what you said first about kind of the continuity isn't really paying off yet. Like, I completely agree. I mean, there's so many times where, like, at least on Saturday specifically, where, like, the man who's going in motion isn't quite able to go full speed because, there's just something a little off. Someone's standing in the wrong spot, or, the timing's a little bit off, like something like that. Those are just mistakes, and those are hindrances to the offense that, like you said, we just should not be seeing at this point in time. The run game, I think, was a lot of like game dependent, you fall behind early, Desmond's not in there. I didn't expect them to run the ball a whole lot after that happened. And I saw people complaining about that, during and after the game. And I don't know. I don't think the biggest issue was necessarily play calling or, the balance between run and pass. But like I said, like it opens up some more parts of your playbook. And if you're able to start a little bit faster, if you at least have a rhythm, like I said, I don't need you to score first, but the players need to be settled in and have confidence in what they're doing. And it just didn't feel like that after their first drive and after their first, I would say the first quarter and a half. So yeah, it was really tough to get going. And, the penalties played an impact in that. Health of their team played an impact in that. But, at the end of the day, Kade Bell and Eli Holstein are going to have to find ways to get everyone, I guess, just settled sooner. Like we said, you need to come ready to play. And that was not something that they were able to do on Saturday afternoon.
And it's not even – oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go for it.
It's not even an issue that's just in the West Virginia game. I think we saw it against Duquesne, and maybe you can do that one. You can excuse that one by saying it was the first game of the season, but it happened against Central Michigan too. And, 3's a pattern at that point. So something that they definitely need to key on this bye week.
Absolutely. And we're going to change gears a little bit now. We're going to look at stuff that's maybe a larger concern, or stuff that's going to take a little bit longer for Pitt to fix. Because, there's some stuff you can do in these 2 weeks in this bye week, but, there's some other stuff that I think is going to take a little bit longer to kind of, I guess, materialize. It's going to take some more work in practice, some more game experience. And Abby, I want to start with Kenny Johnson because we reported this offseason that Kenny got a little bit of a pay bump from Pitt. He was being pursued by other schools to enter the transfer portal during the spring. He's a talented guy, and I just do not think that he has popped in the way that we might have expected him to, or that you might have hoped he would after you give him a pay bump, after he has a promising sophomore season. And there are a couple of things. Like, like we were talking about earlier, like the miscommunications on offense. Like there have been more than a few between him and Eli Holstein, two guys who told us that they are on they are on the same page constantly, that they have a better connection. It has not looked like that so far this year. There have been multiple times where, they're clearly option routes and Kenny's running one way when Eli thinks he's running another. There's just on these screen passes, like it's just inaccurate balls being delivered. It's Kenny dropping a couple passes as well. For whatever reason, Kenny Johnson has really just not been able to get going so far this year. He could also have finished off he should really, in my mind, I think have 2 kick return touchdowns, one on a kick return, maybe one on a punt as well. There are just plays out there for Kenny to be making where he's not. And he's one of these guys that I had labeled as a star coming into this year, and I just don't think that they have gotten star level production from him.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the kick return. There was one very specific. I mean, Steven and I looked at each other and we're like, why did he not go to the open lane? Because there was a wide open lane, and it's the decision making that's very interesting for a guy who has experience, who has a connection with Eli, whether it's for as far along as we thought it was is to be questioned. But this is a guy who should be your number 1 wide receiver, and he's getting overshadowed by understandably Poppy Williams. Like that one, I'm totally makes sense. Poppy Williams is also a returner, but then Blue Hicks has only been here since January, and he's outperforming Kenny Johnson a lot. And then a name we heard a lot on Saturday too is Deuce Spann, and we're getting too far down in the depth chart for that are overshadowing a guy like Kenny Johnson, which just shouldn't be happening because he is an explosive player. We've seen it before, and it just feels like he's not making the most of his opportunities and making honestly rookie mistakes.
Yeah, and it's different, I think, from the linebackers, who I think are like plug and play guys. Like if they have a bad game, I'm not expecting them to have a second. If they make one mistake, I'm not expecting them to make a second mistake and make the same mistake 2 times. Kenny, Kenny, I think is a talented player, but we saw this last year where he kind of faded down the stretch too. Whether that was Holstein's not able to find him, defenses is playing him a little bit differently, or Kenny's making mistakes himself. For whatever reason, and I'm not able to kind of last year, but he did fade. He just wasn't as big a part of the offense late in the year as he was in the beginning. And so in that sense, I'm still waiting to see how Kenny adjusts, how the offense adjusts to, maybe getting some extra attention on Kenny because he's kind of the de facto wide receiver 1 coming into this year. So that's just something I think they need to figure out. And it ties into kind of maybe they're able to get him some easy stuff early, get his confidence up, get him into the game. But somehow, some way, they really got to get Kenny Johnson more involved. So that's one concern that I have offensively. I think another, and I know you have you feel this a little bit more strongly, but that the offensive line has maybe not totally been up to snuff, or at least wasn't on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, and I go back and forth on it because, it's hard to say totally if the amount of sacks that Eli has had, which was 6 in the West Virginia game, are totally because of the offensive line or not. But, 6 is a big number. Not all of those are on Eli. And then, they came in. Lyndon Cooper, BJ Williams, Ryan Baer said on those early days, we want to protect the quarterback more and we want to allow the run game to be more explosive. And neither of those things have really happened. And again, not all of that is on the offensive line, but when you couple that with some of the mistakes they're making on blockage, penalties, I mean, Keith Govia having 2 back-to-back false starts the other day, it's just they're making too many mistakes for an offensive line that is so experienced. And at least 3 of them have played together for over a year. And so I don't know how much of it is on them and how much of it is on Eli, but they just don't look as good as I feel like they should be. And I know the offensive line takes a little bit longer to gel as opposed to other positions, but there's just too many miscues happening that are causing issues like Desmond Reid not being able to get over, get yardage like he would last season, or Eli Holstein. Yeah, maybe he's just not, he said it with the fumble at the beginning of the game that he just didn't trust the protection. You never want to hear that. And so it just feels like there's a lack of connection, a lack of trust, and that needs to get fixed, because if Eli's not feeling comfortable, then he's going to take more time, and that leaves him more open for a bad pass, having to scramble, or getting sacked.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of people down on the offensive line on Saturday, in the immediate aftermath of the game. I didn't think they were awful. I thought, Eli Holstein could afford to have made some quicker decisions, whether that was throwing or getting outside the pocket and scrambling, or making a throw off platform, something like that. But what you pointed out about the kind of mental errors, not being able to hand off a blitzer, not being able to handle a stunt, where guys or a twist where guys are trying to confuse you and circumnavigate the protection. The penalty against the unnecessary roughness penalty against Lyndon Cooper, completely unnecessary. Even more egregious when you watch it back, after the fact. Like you said, the false starts on Keith Gueva, like that's kind of stuff that stuff's unacceptable. And so the mental errors matter a lot more to me than the physical ones. The physical ones, those are going to happen. And also I think Eli Holstein is pretty adept at, getting around those. Like he knows how to kind of I think he's been better. And I noticed it most, I think Saturday, it was actually a pretty good game for him in that sense. In terms of like stepping up into the pressure and stepping up into the pocket and kind of hanging in there for a little bit longer. I know he likes to scramble and run, and that's like a very big part of his game. But I do think he also could. It was nice to see him hang in the pocket a little bit longer, because I thought for the most part, protection was largely good. So yeah, the mental errors matter a lot more to me than the physical ones. So the offensive line just has to get better. It kind of goes hand in hand with the penalty things, but there was some communication and some technical stuff that these offensive linemen, just plain and simple for their age, should be better at, and they need to be better at. And I don't know if that's fixable in 1 week. We haven't seen, I think, enough of this offensive line to say for sure. But yeah, it's plain and simple, got to be better. And position groups as a whole need to get better. I mean, we talked about those linebackers. We're not as worried about them. We talked about the offensive line, but a group that we were concerned about coming into this year, which that's not the case with the offensive line and the linebackers, but this secondary, man, I'm not so sure about it. It's been pretty rough, and I thought it was another rough day for them, even taking into account some of the losses that they had to injuries, Tamon Lynam and Rashad Battle not playing. Look, like I'm just not sure. Like against the run and against the pass, I just didn't think that it was a banner game for Sean Lee and Shadarian Harrison, which that is a little bit more understandable than a guy like Javon McIntyre, not looking very sharp on Saturday afternoon. I think that's been somewhat consistent this year. It's been somewhat consistent over McIntyre's career, and that's a place where I'm wondering, okay, you're trying to develop guys. You can develop a Shadarian Harrison or a Sean Lee because they're younger, but I look at Javon McIntyre and I'm starting to think like maybe we need a little bit more Kavir Baines. Maybe we need a little bit more Josh Garrier. I think McIntyre has his uses. He's obviously a really good communicator, and I think that's a big reason why he still has a starting job and why he was named a captain. He's pretty good against the run. He's a fairly sure tackler, but man, they need guys who are better in coverage because this is. I don't think this is sustainable, especially when you think about a Louisville team that's really going to try to air it out coming into Acrisure Stadium in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the only person that I feel like has been consistent week to week in the secondary is Cruce Brookins. I mean, I watched the last 7 minutes of regulation and overtime from the field, and there was one just insane pass breakup he had in the end zone that saved them from one touchdown. Obviously, West Virginia ended up getting the touchdown later, but they need more plays like that. They need more explosivity, and you're not getting it out of Javon McIntyre. And before Tamon Lynam and Rashad Battle went down with injuries, I'd argue you weren't getting it from them either. And so it's a little bit of a concern when your number twos, especially at corner, Shadarian Harrison and Sean Lee, are almost outperforming in a way the starters. Like, you don't want that to happen because these are guys that should be starter ready, and Shadarian Harrison and Sean Lee aren't quite there yet, but they're playing mostly well. The West Virginia game wasn't great. I will say, I think getting thrown into the line of fire against a team that did come out wanting it more probably was difficult. And Shadarian Harrison was banged up for a good chunk of it, at least in the second half. So I don't worry about the future of the secondary. I'm worried about the right now of the secondary because we're just not seeing enough.
Yeah, I agree. And, it wasn't just kind of against the pass. I mean, it's oddly enough, like the safeties I worry more about the pass, but the corners I worry about the run. Like the linebackers, just Pitt was getting completely washed out on the edge when West Virginia ran to the perimeter and bumps outside. Ran away from those defensive tackles who I thought played really well. So you're just not getting complete games, I think, from anyone. I would have said, before he went down with an injury, Rashad Battle was kind of giving you some good stuff, but we didn't see it consistently enough. He only played in that Duquesne game. So yeah, I'm a little bit at a loss in the secondary. And when I'm at a loss at a position group like this, when I feel like you're not getting complete games from anyone, that's when I start to say, hey, let's put in the young guys. Let's put in the guys lower down on the depth chart, and let's just see what we have. Because if your starters aren't giving you what you want, and, I take Cruce Brookins out of that. Like, I think he's played really well so far this year. The rest of them, I don't know if anyone's played well enough to say, yeah, you're guaranteed a starting spot in week 5 against Louisville, or week 4. Right? No, week 5. Yep, I got it.
It'll be week 5, game 4.
Yes, exactly. There we go. So yeah, big concerns about the secondary, and that's something that you can at least start trying to fix. Yes. I think during these 2 weeks, but it's going to be a work in progress. I'm pretty sure.
And again, I think there's a bright future for Shadarian Harrison and Sean Lee, so I'm hesitant to totally put them in that bucket. I mean, they did not play well on Saturday, but I think with more time on that field, they're going to get better. It just is unfortunate that it has to come in the Backyard Brawl when they were playing from behind the whole time.
I agree with you, Abby. The future is bright, and I think all Pitt fans would be well served to remember that. That's a really happy note to end this show on. It won't be much of a happy week. We are going to keep delivering you coverage nonetheless at post-gazette.com. Make sure to follow all our work there, but also like and subscribe. Like this video, subscribe to our channel at PG Pitt on YouTube. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.